Hi guys, my name is Annette Varghese. I am a second year physical therapy student at Rutgers School of Health Professions in Newark. I'm secretary for APTA-NJ Student Assembly, and today I'm going to be having a conversation with Mike Streifer on his perfect score on the NPTE, which is the National Physical Therapy Exam. Mike Streifer is a physical therapist at Pro Staff Physical Therapy Institute in Montclair, New Jersey. He received his doctorate in physical therapy from Rutgers School of Health Professions, where he was also a teaching assistant for gross anatomy and neuroscience. He is also published as first author in the Journal of Orthopedic and Sports Medicine, and he's also published in a textbook on rehabilitation medicine. So today we're just going to have a conversation with him and interview him to see how he got a perfect score of an 800 on the NPTE. Tune in. So Mike, thank you so much for being with us today. The viewers and I are really excited to hear about your road to the 800 on the NPTE.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure to have you. So can you give us a quick rundown on the NPTE?
Yeah, so the NPTE stands for the National Physical Therapy Exam, and it's the required test to pass to become a licensed physical therapist. It's 250 questions. You have 5 hours to take the test in a testing center, and only 200 of the questions actually are graded. And it's graded on a scaled score from 200 to 800. You don't actually ever see your percentage, and you need a 600 or above to pass the exam. Okay. So the 250 questions that you take are broken up into 5 sections, and there's one scheduled break where the clock actually stops. The 5-hour clock stops for 15 minutes, and you can step out of the exam room and kind of relax a little bit.
Okay. Did you use your scheduled break?
Yeah, so I use a scheduled break. I recommend taking it because you will be 150 questions in at the time. It's after the third section. And after the other sections, you also are allowed to take a break, but the clock will keep running. So those I didn't take because I felt like I was very zoned in. I was very focused, so I didn't think I needed to take it. But some people I know need to take it because, if you feel like you're losing focus or you're reading the same question over and over, then I recommend stepping out of the room, getting away from that screen, and taking a little bit of time, if you have it, to kind of reset yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that, one reason I was able to power through is because the way I prepared for the test is I really focused on test-taking endurance, in addition to just content. Because the MPT isn't just testing your knowledge of the content, it's also testing your ability to take a test.
Right.
So I really put that in my preparation, and I think that's why I didn't feel like I needed a break after certain sections.
So how did you go about building your test-taking endurance when you were preparing?
So the way I focused on that was I use study timers a lot. So I knew that this test is 5 hours long. You're taking 250 questions in a row. So I knew that focusing on the endurance to do that was a really important part of the study. So what I did was, a lot of times if I felt like I needed to stop studying or I was burnt out or I needed to take a break, instead of actually taking the break, I would just set a timer for another 30 minutes or an hour and just review material and just force myself to sit down and review. And even though I really didn't want to, I think that helped build that endurance.
Oh, okay.
So I don't recommend doing that and forcing yourself to study in that manner if you're learning something new or you're focusing on a new piece of material. But if you're reviewing something and you do it that way, I think that can really help build your test-taking endurance.
Okay. So there are different ways of studying that people use. One I've heard of is doing the 50-10 minute ratio, where you study for 50 minutes and you take a 10-minute break, or you study for 45 minutes and you take a 15-minute break. There are different variations.
Yeah.
Would you recommend anything like that?
Well, I wouldn't personally, because I think a lot of times what happens is people strictly follow a plan because it makes them feel a little more comfortable. It makes them feel like they're structured and they're studying. But that's not always what they need at that time. So if you're forcing yourself to study for 50 minutes when you're learning something new, and then you're forcing yourself to take exactly a 10-minute break, that might not be what you actually need. You're just following that plan because that's the structure that you chose to follow.
Right.
So what I would do when I was in my 6 weeks of studying before the exam, when I wasn't in clinical or anything, I would make sure that I got 6 to 8 hours of studying in that day total. Okay. So I would set a timer, and if I needed a break, I would stop the timer and take a break. I didn't force myself to do 50 minutes. Sometimes it would be only 10 minutes, and if I wasn't feeling that day and I needed to take a long break, then I would do that. But I would make sure that that day I still got the hours that I told myself I was going to get in studying that day.
Oh, okay.
But I think there are problems with over-structuring your studying, because then you're trying to follow a specific plan but that may not be really what's going to be best for you in the long run.
Mm-hmm. So what resources did you use to prepare for the NPTE?
So the resources I used, there's a lot of debate out there about what study book to use for the NPTE.
Yeah.
So you have the Therapy Ed book and you have the Score Builders book. Those are like the two main NPTE books.
Mm-hmm.
I highly recommend using both because they're a little bit different in their content. They're a little bit different in how they're laid out. And also, I think a problem with people have when they're studying for this test is they take one of those books and they just kind of run with it and they memorize that book. The NPTE isn't on a specific book. It's on physical therapy material overall.
Yeah.
So use those books as a study guide. Don't use those as your primary source for information that you're going to be tested on.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was I used both the Therapy Ed book and the Score Builders book, but I got most of my content from the regular textbooks that you use throughout school. The O'Sullivan book for physical rehabilitation, therapeutic exercise, cardiopulm, differential diagnosis, pathology. Those are the books where I really got the information, the content from. I only use the Therapy Ed and the Score Builders books more as study guides.
Okay.
A lot of people think that if they memorize those books, that's going to help them do well in the NPT, but that's generally not the case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how long before did you start preparing for the NPTE?
Personally, I took 11 weeks before the exam to prepare. The first 5 weeks I was in clinical, so I wasn't forcing myself to go crazy, but on the weekends I would study a lot, and I tried to get an hour or two in during the days I was in clinical. And then 6 weeks before the exam, I wasn't doing anything but strictly focusing on studying for the NPTE. And I felt like I wish I had a little more time.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably recommend starting a little bit further out, but it ended up working out, and it was really good to have time before the exam to study without being in clinical.
So how much time would you recommend prior to the NPTE?
I think I would have felt a little better if I did 16 weeks, but generally it's going to be different for everyone. It's going to depend on how much time you have out of clinical and what exam you're taking.
Right.
But I think 16 weeks is a good amount of time.
Okay. So what's one of the biggest mistakes that you feel that students make when preparing for the NPTE?
So I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is just trying to make their studying easy and comfortable. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but when you think about taking an exam, and not even just an exam like this, but especially something where there's so much content and a lot of preparation, a lot of anxiety around it.
Yeah.
There's the preparation phase for the exam, and then there's the execution and taking the test. One of those two things has to really challenge you and really be hard.
Mm-hmm.
If you try to make the preparation and studying too easy, then you're really going to be challenged when you're taking the exam, and it's really going to be difficult. But if you can figure out a way to study where you're challenging yourself, you're stepping outside your comfort zone, you're sacrificing, that extra half hour to study that day, then the exam itself is going to be easier. So I think a mistake people make is they try to find ways to make their preparation a little bit more comfortable, a little bit easier. Oh, do I really have to study this many hours? Do I need to go through this many pages? Do I need to look over this specifically? My recommendation is just do it. This is the last exam you have to take, and just go all in. If you prepare in a way that's uncomfortable, that's challenging, that's hard, that you feel like you're putting a lot of effort in, most likely the exam itself is going to be easier and you're going to be happy.
Right.
It's like preparing for a big sporting event. You have to, push yourself to the limits when you're preparing, so that when you're in the event or the tournament or whatever it is, you don't have to push yourself then. You feel like you're ready for it.
Right, yeah. So I'm in my last didactic semester of the PT school.
Mm-hmm.
What recommendations would you give to a student like me who's about to start clinicals in August, and I'm not really in the 10 to 12 week preparation stage yet? What recommendations would you give?
So you're a year out from the exam. Don't stress too much about it, obviously. Focus on your clinicals would be my primary recommendation. Make sure you're focusing on that. And you could still study for the exam. A lot of people do feel like they want to get a head start. And at this point, for you, what I would recommend doing is just studying things that you're seeing in your clinical, because you're going to be learning a lot. You're going to be going through different settings. You don't have to force yourself to study random topics on the NPTE. You could kind of see something in clinical that maybe you don't know that much about, and then go home and look at it through the lens of how the NPT is going to ask questions about it and how you can learn it from the textbooks. And then you might remember it better because you're seeing it clinically as well.
And connect it to something.
Yeah, so I would recommend trying to make those connections while you're in your clinical, so that the studying is a little bit easier when you get to those 16 to 12 weeks before the exam.
So thinking more like a PT prior to, so it
Exactly,
helps us.
yeah. Start thinking like a physical therapist, because that's what the exam wants to see. They don't want you to just memorize everything.
Right. Okay, well, those are all the questions we have for you today, so thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you.
So you can follow Mike on Instagram at Streifer_DPT.
Yeah,
is that it?
That's it.
He has also a series on his YouTube channel on how he actually prepared for the NPTE. It goes into the specifics. It's like a 4-part video. I watched it. It was really good. So I would highly recommend that. Do you have any plans to start tutoring people for the NPTE?
I do, but I'm focusing on clinical right now, or working, and I think the next round, next July, I'm going to start doing a little more tutoring.
Okay. Well, we'll catch him a year from now. Start following him on Instagram so you can figure out when he starts, tutoring people for that. So, my name is Annette. I'm the secretary of APTA-NJ. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.